There are a lot of methods in JavaScript that take advantage of higher order functions. They solve problems using patterns that take advantage of those higher order functions. And we can learn from this and use it in our own code. As just one example, let's look at the sort method that is available for arrays. Here I've got two arrays, one with names and one with numbers. And we're going to sort them. So let's do the names and also numbers like this. And then take a look at the results. So if we save that, let me get out here to the console again. And now we look at those two arrays, names and nums. We can see that with the names, things are sorted correctly. They're sorted in alphabetical order. But what the sort method does with numbers is it converts them to a string and then sorts alphabetically based on the string. And so we're getting some really weird stuff here with numbers. And so sort by itself is not ideal for numbers. However, the sort method was set up to take a higher order function, a compare function, as a parameter. We can pass a function into the sort method. It will use that function to do a comparison on elements. It will take each element two at a time down through the array and compare them based upon the function we pass in. And then that will determine the sort order. Now, the way that works is if the first argument that is passed in, so when we create our function, it passes in the first two elements. If the first argument should appear before the second argument, then we need to make sure that our function returns a number less than 0. If the second argument should come before the first argument, then a number greater than 0 should be returned. Now, think about the advantage of that. We're going to do this in just a minute, but think about the advantage that this sort method is no longer limited to just sorting strings. We can now have it sort other things because it accepts a function as one of its parameters. And it uses that function and calls it for, in this case, the elements two at a time as it passes them in. So let's try that with nums. So I'm going to pass in a function, and like I said, that function needs to accept two parameters. It's going to accept the first two elements and so on as it works through that array. Now, since we need to return a number less than 0 if the first argument should come before the second argument, we can do something like this: return A minus B. And this will do a sort order smallest to greatest. We could reverse that going the other direction. Because look, if 100 is passed in and 95 is passed in for A and B, 100 minus 95 equals 5. So that is a number that is greater than 0. And that means that the second argument will come before the first argument. So it'll put 95 before 100. Now it's going to compare all of those numbers together and get them in a sorted order. Sort knows how to do that. All we have to do is pass in the function like what we've done here. So if we save that and take a look at nums again, we see that it's smaller to greater. So numerous methods in JavaScript take advantage of this, the ability to accept a function and call it when needed. And we can do the same thing in our code. We can take advantage of it as well. Let's say I wanted to create a function that processes strings. Let me just go ahead and copy it in here, and then we'll talk about it. Here's my function that processes strings. We allow a string to be passed in, and then we automatically convert that to uppercase. That's what we do in this process string function. I'm trying to keep it simple so we can keep this callback information the focus. So it'll convert it to uppercase. However, if we send in a callback, it will do more. It will do whatever we indicate with the function. So suddenly this function is a lot more powerful. It can do a lot more. Now notice how we deal with the callback. We create a new string with to uppercase, but then we check to see if the type of callback equals function. So if something's been passed in and it is a function, then we go ahead and invoke it and pass in this new string that we've already done the uppercase conversion. That callback does whatever it needs to and returns it, and then we return that value. If there is no callback, we just return the new string that we created. So this can give you an idea, a pattern for making functions that are a lot more flexible, a lot more powerful. Now let's go ahead and just try this. Let's just use it so we can see how it works. So I'm going to do a console log because I want to log the results of what is returned from process.string or from process string to the console. So I call process string, that function right there, and I'm going to pass in a string. So let's go ahead and set up a string up here, const str1, and I'll just set this equal to, this is a string, something simple like that. So we want to pass that in str1 to this process string function. Now we want to pass in a callback. And I'm going to set up that callback right here. So I enter function. It's going to be anonymous function. And there's a curly brace. Now I can define what it does. But one thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we put a variable here for the parameter. I'm just going to call that val for value. Because look what's happening up here. Is passing in that new string to this callback function. So we need to make sure we accept it. Accept it and then do something with it. Well, let's say all we want to do more is just create an array out of that string. We'll split on the space. So we use the split method and split on the space. So we will return that once we've done that. And then here's the split method. And then we just put space in there as what we want to split on. So what we should get, what should log to the console, is this string, all in uppercase, inside an array, and each word will be its own element in the array. And so we've made our process string function more powerful and more flexible by making it higher order. So let's go ahead and save this and take a look at it. And there we get an array, everything in uppercase, each word its own element in the array. So what I want you to get out of this is the power of higher order functions. Higher order functions are used throughout JavaScript, and we can also take advantage of that feature in our own code. And with this simple example, that is what we have done. All right, let's move on to the next section.